Welcome everybody. Here is our next tutorial for transferable skills, and we'll be looking at using SPSS. So how about we look at the background? And in this background, what you found is after your initial analysis, the chiropractor sends you the correct data. And what was really missing was the control and the spinal manipulative group. So the question that we'd like to ask is that whether or not people receiving SMT had lower pain scores than the control group upon follow-up. Now during this tutorial we'll be doing a range of things, and we'll be looking at descriptive statistics, histograms, creating bar charts, and also how to perform a t-test to answer the chiropractor's questions. So let's get on with the Excel sheet, and here you can see the original data that the chiropractor first gave you, and then the additional data, which was really your post-control and your post-treatment data. Now, in Excel, what we find is that we would usually bring it about in a number of different columns. But what we need to do is we really need to reformat that data and organize it just a little bit better so that SPS can now read it and give us the type of analysis that we want. What I've done is on the right hand side just really schematically tried to represent the data, and in yellow and red, and then what we've also done is added a grouping variable, and this is really there for SPSS to know which one of the two groups a particular series of numbers belongs to. And in the green box you'll see that I've put down that a 1 at any particular row refers to baseline data, and if it's a 2, it's post-treatment data. So now what we've done is we've put the data one on top of each other, and we're ready to start in SPSS. Now on the right hand side you'll probably notice the SPSS dialog box that is open, and you usually have to click New Data Set or Type Data. So once you select that, what you then do is you will find a dialog box that's open, and we'll have two files. The first one is your control view, and the next one is your dataset view. Now we need to remember that there are three columns. The first is the control, the second is the SMT, and the third is the grouping variable. Once we remember that, we select all of the data and we simply right click and copy. And then in your data view, which looks a lot like Excel, we just paste the three columns that we have. So we right click in the data view and we just paste the three columns. And those columns should turn up nice and easily. Now the next thing we need to do is, as you can see, the titles on each of those columns are variables 1, 2 and 3. And we need to assign some particular settings to each one of those columns. So the first one, if we remember, was the control group, and we give the name control. The second column is the SMT group, and we name it appropriately. And the third column is our grouping variable. Now remember, in this name column, we cannot add any spaces. So we just make sure that the first, second and third columns were the right groups, and we then go back to SPSS and we continue with outlining what each of the columns mean. Now because we've got whole number data, we don't need any decimal points, so we change those decimal columns to 0. And then in the labels, we will type in exactly how we want our tables and our charts to appear. And sometimes that may be necessary, other times it may not. But here let's just put it in for completeness sake. We write in the SMT group, and then the label for our grouping variable will be either group or it could be intervention. So it depends on whatever we'd like to name it, as long as your charts and your tables make sense for a third person to read them. Here we've got the values, and we don't really need to do anything apart from the third group, because we need to tell SPSS what those 1s and 2s actually mean. So in our case, a 1 is the baseline data and the 2 is the post-treatment or follow-up data. So we need to let SPSS know what those 1 and 2 are. And here what we're going to do is just change the name to intervention, just so it's a little bit easier to remember. So if we have too many groups, it can become a little complicated. So let's leave that into intervention. And now the values, what we'll do is we're going to tell SPSS that whenever it sees a 1 in this column, it will mean baseline. Here you'll see what I've done is I've misspelt it. And the great thing with SPSS is it has a pretty nice spell checker. So just in case, we can go down and we can find baseline. We'll change that, and it does that for us. Press OK. We still have to tell it what number 2 in that column is, and we tell that. We write down that it's the follow-up data, and we press add, and away we go. Now the last thing we need to do is we need to tell SPSS what kind of numbers these are, what data it is. And as we've spoken before in the tutorial, the control and SMT, we're going to assume a scale, and the intervention is nominal. Now if we then go back to data view, we'll see that everything is formatted appropriately, and now we can start with our sort of creation of tables and charts, so that then we can have a better idea whether or not the chiropractor's SMT had an effect on pain scores. So just organising ourselves now, and what we'll do is the first thing we will have a look at is our descriptive stats. All right, so our descriptive statistics really tells us a bit more about an open, or tells us what the environment is for the data that we have. We select all 3. In the options, we'd like the variance, the range, the standard, the mean of the standard error, and the kurtosis and skewness. Later on, you'll learn about how they can be used to give you an indication whether or not your data is normally distributed. Press OK, and here we have the data. As you can see, the control group, the range is 10, which means that the minimum score in that column was 0 and the maximum was 10. The SMT group is also 0 and 10. And we have the means and the standard errors. That can give us a nice overview of the data that we have collected. So once we have a look at this, the next thing that we really want to try and do is that for some people, changing these results into a graph or something visual can be a little bit more intuitive. And that's what we're going to do now. Now what we're going to do is create a histogram. And in the histogram, we're going to do one variable at a time. We're going to ask it to display a normal curve. And then what we find is, after a bit of processing, the histogram of that data of that group is created. Now let's do the same for the SMT group. So we're going to move that out of there, and the SMT group is then there. And now what we have is we have the histogram showing us the distribution or the spread of the data over all the values that we've attained. Now what we're going to do now is try and format this. Sometimes we may need to change the chart a little bit. So you double click the chart and another dialog box or the chart editor opens up. If I want to just highlight the typical or normal distribution curve, I click on that, select a color, select the thickness, press apply, and as we can see, the normal distribution curve has been changed. If I select the background of that chart, what you'll notice, it's highlighted in yellow. I can select a different color there, press apply, and it changes it. So here you've got pretty much quite an extensive bit of freedom to change that chart as you feel suits you. The next thing we're going to do is give it a bit of a title, and up the top there you'll have this button here which tells us about the title, and here we can add a title. So what we're going to call this is the distribution and we're talking about pain scores, and we're talking about the SMT group. So it's distribution of SMT group pain scores. So once we have the title that we'd like, all we need to do is we can remove this if we like. We're just trying to remove it now. And the chart automatically formats. Once we're happy, press the X and the chart becomes updated. Now we can change the size of this chart if we like, so we can make it smaller or larger depending on what we need, where we need to put the chart. So we can have this amount of flexibility within SPSS. So that's how we can format any chart essentially. The rules are the same. The way you access the chart is exactly the same, and it's pretty simple to do. Now, the next thing that we really want to try and look at is now we want to try and create another graph, but here we're going to create a bar graph with error bars. So we click bar graphs, we want a clustered bar graph, and then we want to select summaries of separate variables. Press define, and now we have the dialog box open. And what we're going to do here is we're going to let SPSS know that we want the mean of the SMT and the control group, and then at the bottom it's the intervention. So it'll change it, or it'll categorize it according to the intervention. Now you notice there's mean there, but we've got a lot of other options here. We can look at the mode of each group, the standard deviation, the variance, but usually the mean's the best place to start with. So we select the means. In the options, we'll see probably that there's nothing much there that we really need to change. And apart from, we need to display the error bars. And so what you need to do is click on display error bars, and then you have different options, but we're going to pick the standard error, and we're going to multiply it by 2 because the error bar is plus or minus the mean. So the standard error gives us a range around the mean, in which case it needs to be multiplied by 2. And here we have the bar chart. So the bar chart now tells us a little bit of how the differences are, but it's really not telling us the whole story, because as you notice that on the left-hand side, the mean values give us a maximum of 8. But in actual fact, our values go from 0 to 10. So one of the things that we really need to do is we need to format the scale on the left-hand side. And so ideally, we want it to reflect the minimum and maximum values that can be given using the NRS. So we select the tick marks, and we go to scale, and as you can see, it's giving us a maximum of 7 and a minimum of 0. And we need to change that maximum to 10. Right, and we'll leave the major increment there to 1. We'll change it to 1, press apply, and here we have a more accurate reflection of the results within the framework of the NRS scale. Now here you can do a lot of other things. You can change the types of axis titles. You can not display them or display them. So you can do a number of different things. Change the format of the numbering. Here you can also add or take away or change the way in which that chart is highlighted. But for now, we'll leave it at this. And what we can see is that the error bars and the mean values are showing us quite an interesting thing. Now let's reformat and change a color here. Maybe change the color of our control group, which is a dark blue. We may want it a lighter blue. So we click on that. It highlights in yellow, change the color, and it's done. We do the same for the SMT group, change the color, and it's done. So here is our bar chart showing us our expected error from the data around each of the mean values, right? And that's why we had to multiply that by 2. And what you'll notice is that the top of each of the columns represents the mean value, and then the top and bottom of the error bars represent plus the standard error and minus the standard error around the mean. And what you'll notice is that the follow-up is there is a pretty big difference between the control group and the SMT group, whereas at baseline, pretty much the same. Now, whilst this intuitively tells us that there's a difference, we still need to know what the absolute numbers are. So we'll go to Analyze, where we will compare means, select the independent sample t-test, and from here we're going to, in the test variable, put control and SMT, and in the grouping variable we need to tell it which one is group 1 and which one is group 2. In our options, there's nothing much to change here, so we'll leave that alone. And let's press OK. And now what we've done is we've done a simple t-test. Now let's just change the size of this graph so we can get everything on one page. And what you'll see is our t-test, and here it's giving us the control group, and we're going to look at the two-tailed significance level as well as the mean difference columns. So these are the real two columns that we need to look at. And in the control, it's telling us that at baseline, between the SMT and the control group, there was only a 0.06 difference between the two groups, and that this wasn't significantly different because it had a significance of 0.924. Whereas if we look at the SMT group, or the follow-up group, what we notice is that there is a big difference between the control group and the SMT group of about 1.48 at follow-up. So there is a difference there, and we can notice it. We notice it at the chart there, but also that this difference is statistically significant because we get a two-tailed significance value of 0.07. So what we have here, as far as the chiropractor is concerned in asking their question, that at follow-up there was a significant difference between the SMT group and the control group, and that this was on average 1.48 of a difference on the NRS score, and this was significantly different. So here what we've done is shown a bit of data that that the chiropractor's given us. We've given you a couple of different ways in which you can analyze it very simply, and also how you can represent it graphically. Don't worry too much about interpreting it at this stage. This tutorial is more about learning how we can develop the strategy or use SPSS to give us the numbers that we need. And I hope you can practice this a little bit more and utilize and be comfortable with SPSS so that you can start using it with a little bit more confidence if you are given some numbers or you're given some data to practice on at a later date. So at this stage, have a go, and thank you very much for listening in on this tutorial. If you need to see me or if you need to talk about anything, please email me at avitiello@aecc.ac.uk. Thank you.